Jeanette, what do you think of the lighting?
It's amazing. I do want to refocus one light that is on the third floor.
Oh, I know. Though perhaps it is intentional that we are only looking at the horse's hooves.
It's a choice.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming out to the Park Avenue Armory, coming to the symposium, as well as coming to our panel. I want to begin with a few thank yous, and then I'm going to introduce our incredible panelists, and then we're just going to proceed on with our conversation. And then we actually were told that this was only going to be 45 minutes, and now it's going to be an hour, which is great because we wanted to build in more Q&A in order to really sort of take the conversation beyond this mini stage that we are on and include everybody who is in this room. So thank you to Tavia, Jane, Brandon, Mimi, and Mikhail for animating these ideas this weekend. Thank you to Rachel, Darian, and Lucille, who made all of the logistics happen so that we could be here together today. And thank you so much to Shayna, our stage manager, for managing all of us. My name is Christine Mock. I'm a dramaturg and a designer and an assistant professor of English at the University of Rhode Island. I am pleased to very, very briefly introduce our incredible panelists. You can see that their full bios are in the program, and so I encourage you to check those out. So our first speaker is Sarita Fellows. She is an award-winning costume designer whose more recent credits include Death of a Salesman, this season on Broadway. Born in Sierra Leone, she has lived in 8 different countries and 4 different continents. She is an associate professor at the University of Connecticut and lectures at Princeton. Next to Sarita is Jeanette Oi-Suk, who is an award-winning designer of visual environments for theater, opera, dance, music performances, performance art, installation, and immersive experiences. She is an associate arts professor with NYU's Tisch drama. So if you could please raise your hands, welcome our 2 panelists. Now, you're probably here because of the title of our panel, which is Teaching Design and Production with an Anti-Racist Lens. In our preparatory conversation, we actually were asked if we wanted a different title, and because we are all incredibly busy people, but also because the title was a really sort of useful prompt for us. We all decided that we would stick with it and use it as a kind of rich jumping off point. And so this is really where I wanted us to begin our conversation, which is, what does teaching design and production with an anti-racist lens mean to each of you?
I think you should go first.
I know. So I'm going to say that this is really scary. As a designer, this is not my place of comfort. So I sit here very honored to be sitting with you, Jeanette and Christine, and my thanks to putting this whole thing together. And my thanks to you, the audience, and your grace for my stumbling through this. I'm a little bit like, wow, people want to hear me say things? It's kind of cool. But I guess what that means to me when I heard the title, and I won't lie, I was kind of like, what does that, like, breaking it down, what do those words even mean? Like, what does each of those words actually mean? And I think before anti-racism and Ibram Kendi like really sort of pioneered that phrasing, my whole life has been about racism on some level, just because of how I walk through this world. So teaching with an anti-racist lens, it's sort of speaking to who I am as a person and how I just enter the room wherever I am and in whatever circumstance I am. It's like I can't teach without an anti-racist lens. That to me is like the difference is that it's always there for me because of who I am. I'm forced to see everything with that glaze over my eyes, which means I notice when I'm sitting in a room with white men glaring over me and things, like that sort of nature. But I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I think same to you, Sarita. When that question came up, when that title came up, I have never changed my teaching because we are more conscious about this idea. Because I always teach with who I am, and I can't really teach it with something else. But I do think what that does is, I'm gonna tell a story that leads into this. I was just in Madrid, and I'm just in Spain, and I visited this island called the Gran Canaria, which some of you in this room may know. And what was really fascinating to me was, I was just actually saying this to Mimi upstairs, was that we have now, as a country, starting to really embrace our past and the complication and the difficulties of everything that is our land and where we are, and asking difficult questions about our relationship with indigenous culture, our relationship with slavery, our relationship with immigrants, all these other questions, right? And then when I was in Gran Canaria, it was really super interesting, was that there is indigenous people who existed in Gran Canaria before Spain happened, but there was no mention of it anywhere. Everything is just like, there were people there, and then there was Spain. And Spain did all these things, and this is awesome, right? And so to me, like, this title reminds me, what makes me think about is like, is us finally asking the difficult questions and getting rid of some assumption that, because there's an assumption, like even this morning, someone in the opening session say something about how there's an assumption that when I learn, there's like a process that I have to go through, and that's always the way it is, right? And I think what that title makes me really think about is that it's now asking all of us to really ask the question of what are we doing in teaching. And I think that even for us who were innately already sort of doing it, it still is challenging us to keep asking it. How can we elevate this, highlight this, work with other people to unearth this, is what I thought about.
I agree with that, and that it's putting a name to things that prior were not really named. Mm-hmm. And in naming the thing, it validates it. And it puts it on a place that we can actually like really have a discourse with people who may not even have the entrance of how to talk about these things.
So both of you are getting at the kind of, I don't know, it's like the multi-way street that is kind of teaching, like what it is that we bring into a classroom and what we want to offer students, but also what students bring to us, right? So I was wondering, having sort of given you the sort of loaded question to unpack the title of this panel, is if we could sort of get at this another way, which is to say, I wonder what it is that inspires you as a teacher, and see if in sort of talking about that, we can sort of think about how this might connect with these questions about an anti-racist lens, i.e. how we approach pedagogy versus how it is that we sort of embody and exist and interact.
What inspires me as a teacher? Mm-hmm. Honestly, it's just the question that I think, how do I prepare them for the future is like, kind of not quite summarizing it, is that I choose to teach undergrad. And I choose to teach undergrad because I am interested in this junction in their lives of trying to figure out the next thing, which is totally be independent. I remember when I was like 22 years old, in the spring when I graduated, I was in a panic because my entire life I've been told that I have to go to school and have to graduate. And then all of a sudden I feel like, oh my God, what do I do next? I'm dropping off, right? It's like all of a sudden that is done. And so I choose to do this because I'm inspired by thinking about what's next for them. And then in that process of thinking about what next for them, it makes me think about what am I doing? Am I doing the thing that I am actually teaching? And so it's a two-way street of like trying to think about these two things simultaneously. And it makes me grow as a human being, and I think that that's what inspired me.
Beautiful. I think for me, it kind of goes back to the storytelling. I got into this career because I love conversation and I love learning about what humanity is and how we meet each other. And I think that students are in this wonderful inquisitive place, like undergrad or grad, and we are still trying to figure ourselves out. And the classroom is this place where we are supposedly invited to have that conversation. And the story is a safe place, theoretically, that we can open up those conversations. And the things that this next generation, the generation after my generation, like that I discover about myself, about others, is kind of incredible and like always astounds me. So I do it for selfish reasons. I just want to know what other people think.
Well, maybe another way to get at this is, what is it that you want your students to walk away from your classes knowing? Or what is it that you want your students to walk away from your classes? What questions should they be asking?
Yeah, I think, so there's nothing more exciting than when I give a play, right? And I ask my students, okay, I need you to cast this play. Where does it take place? What's happening? What does the story mean for you? And then seeing the transition of how they take the story from a very inside place, like that it's my experience, and then they discover like, oh, actually the playwright is talking about this other really intense, difficult thing called racism, or difficult thing called whatever the ism is. And that realization and that understanding that without, in the playwright, like they don't say it's a black man, black woman, blah, 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 but they discover that for themselves is really exciting. And it's like, okay, I did my job, thank God. But even at the very least for them to look at their own work and ask who is not in this piece of work and why are they not there?
I think that I would love it if we walk away from the room and ask, how can I be the best collaborator in that process? In addition to everything that you were saying, Sarita, not be afraid to ask the big question, not be afraid to be wrong, not be afraid to be challenged, and not be afraid to challenge others. I think that having a sense of, I know these are all very abstract things, but through the process of doing the classroom work, I'm hoping that they can walk away with it to be able to gain those confidence. And then also, because I think that we always talk about, when we teach theater particularly, we always talk about how this is all about collaboration, but we never actually codified it and never actually say what this thing is. And so I'm hoping that they can start to go like, what am I doing to make me the best version of a collaborator in this process? And I would like that.
So there's a way in which your Jeanette, your answer is actually getting at this question, which is linked. So if I just asked you about thinking about what it is that you see your students walking out of your class, what do you want students to enter into the industry, either knowing, asking, questioning, or demanding?
That's That's a hard question to answer. Knowing, asking, demanding,
or questioning.
or questioning.
You could pick any of those actions.
I was saying earlier that I said that part of my teaching ethos is that I would never lie to my students about what this field is and how it is very flawed. I will always be honest about that. I will also simultaneously tell you that I wouldn't want to do anything else, right? And so I guess that's what I want them to go out into the world and be prepared for, knowing that this industry is 100% flawed in every dimension, and being able to kind of face it head on and not just accept it as it is, but also know that there is a process for which things can happen and how can be that thing that makes it happen. I think then in short, that's what I would say.
Yeah, ditto. No, I think along with that, I would want my students to absolutely, and I think actually with this generation, they are doing it better than how I did it, to tell you the truth. So I'm kind of learning from them, because they are, for sure, more aggressive in telling their woes and their, like, the things that are hurting them in a way that was very different to how I navigated the industry when I came out as a student. So I think part of my job is to is trying to find the place of conversation, that we're not trying to change anybody's mind on anything. Otherwise, we're going to die like 30 years earlier than we should, because we're just too stressed out. But that we can take a moment to hear each other and listen, and at least say the things we need to say, and let that sit in the room. And whatever happens after that, it's not on you to solve or figure out. And I think that's like the big challenge that I'm having, is how to prepare them for a truly rounded conversation, and considerate conversation, because I think there's also so much fear. When we hear the word anti-racism, there's sort of like this immediate link to fear and like fright and cancellation and and it's like, how do I break all of that down before we can even start to have the conversation of like, why did you cast this whole play white? Because if we can't trust each other even on just that level, we're just not going to get anywhere.
That's also, we were just having this conversation too. I think that being able to start think about what is the differences between integrity, authenticity, and representation in the lens of anti-racism, anti-racist anything, teaching, whatever that is. I think it's a very important skill set and ability, and that changes on every single journey. I'm going to be doing a Madame Butterfly, sort of a really exciting way of thinking about that. And that particular opera have a lot of problems. It's written by Puccini, for one thing, which have nothing to do with Japanese culture. And also, and it has all sorts of different questions, like really hard thing to think about. And we were constantly thinking, the dramaturg, the director, everyone is constantly thinking about how to address all three of these things constantly. Like, it's important to, have, how do we represent Japanese culture and also in today's conversation, not just like about that opera itself in that time frame. And understanding that these three things are constantly changing in relationship to one another, and that is a very critical thinking journey that we all have to go through. to make those connection points, and there is no standard way to do it. You just have to keep engaging and engaging and engaging with it, and know that it's hard, and know that you will get it wrong sometime, and then that's also totally okay, and know that I'm wrong, how can I then learn from this? And what's the next thing that I do? And what's the next thing that I do? In order to enact any change, we have to understand that it is about each step along the way. And I think that that's the thing that I'm trying to constantly teach and have that as an awareness.
I love thinking about those together: integrity, authenticity, representation, right? In part because oftentimes the conversation on anti-racist pedagogy, especially in theater, and obviously because we are talking about theater design, much of it is a question about the visual or optics. Usually this conversation focuses on representation, often only representation. So I'm interested in asking you what it is that you think is dropping out of the conversation, where should we be moving? Because oftentimes what ends up happening is like, yes, sure, diversifying your syllabus, that is step one, but what comes next?
Well, I mean, I think even with diversifying syllabus is complicated, right? Because it often, the step one about diversifying syllabus was to just put plays in by different writers, that's it. But the whole thing is actually, first of all, I think that if we're looking for just studying in theater work, in school, if you're just looking at reading plays as the avenue to address this, then I think we're all screwed. Because there are just like too many plays. I can't possibly read all of them. I can't possibly understand all of them and digest all of them. And every one of those things is unique and is trying to address different aspects of it, right? So I think that right off the bat, that we have to accept that there has to be many, 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 many different tools. And I think as designer, I think that there is at least for me in my classroom, I'll deal with it in two different ways. In some, again, I'm simplifying it. But in a way, it's like, I think that we have to be aware, first and foremost, that when we teach design, every single thing that we put in front of it as a visual is saying something. Never take that as like a norm or this is the standard or, like it just, I think that we have to be able to teach, when we teach it, we have to be able to break it down as simple as like, why am I interested in showing this particular thing in front of my students? And that's for me to answer. And then I think that for me lately, my major journey is to then say that, can I then explain this? How can I make it as transparent as possible for my student? So that they also understand that, because whatever I bring in is also going to be a flaw, because it can't represent everything. So I also have to be honest with them and be able to say to them that, yes, I know that this is like, we are in this room because this room is available for us to be in. Like, for example, I'm simplifying it, but how can I be transparent? And I think that, can we make our syllabus that way? Can we all be transparent? That's...
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think something that you said that strikes me in terms of being able to see, there's something about like that is ringing true. It brings up memory of like a project. I think we talked about this earlier, where we, just to make it very simple for the audience, we're talking about a project that I saw, and a bunch of students had designed the same project, and all of them except
costume renderings.
Yeah, costume renderings. Thank you. Costume renderings, and all of the students except for one student did not put skin tones into the characters. And the only student that did put skin tone in was, the skin tones were black, like African American. And immediately I was like, oh, that's the one African American student in this class. And the thing about it is that if you can't even see, like, like the idea that nothing does not mean nothing, that there is still something. So being able to see the nothing is what I'm trying to always do. Is like, what am I not seeing? What am I not granting myself permission to understand in the work that I'm doing with these students, right? And that's the hard part for me as a teacher, and getting them to challenge themselves to do as well.
So when Sarita had told this story, it took me a few months to like get her to unpack it, because I was like, wait a second, was the paper white? Did they draw in features? Was it only clothes and the renderings were in color? So they had access to color, but they chose not to, right?
Exactly.
So I think that the other frame of this was that this was a colleague's class, right? And this sort of segues in, because there's one thing to talk about, what we might do in our own classroom, what we might do with the students that we mentor, but your classroom is just part of a larger department, a larger curriculum, a larger institution, an industry. How do you navigate these structures, and how do you mentor students to navigate these structures as well?
That's a great question. Because, I only have so much time. That's part of this problem, man. Like, the time. Because if I could go to all of the classes and see what's happening with everybody and be like, okay, there's some shenanigans over there. That's really good over there.
There's some white nonsense over there.
Like, oh, this is how I'm feeling myself. Like, if I had that time, that would be amazing. So do you have secrets to how to do this?
I wish I have. I have a magic wand that I hide. Yes, time is a big question. First of all, your question earlier, what I want the student to be able to get out of, right? So then I have to practice that. That means that when I'm sitting in a faculty meeting or am I looking at other people's syllabus, that I'm starting to ask the other people a question. In a way that, this is why I think that it also goes back to collaboration. This is actually remarkably similar, like doing a project with a director who proposes you something and you go like, I don't think we want to do that. So how do I then raise the question, making them feel like that I wasn't attacking them? So similarly, I think that I take that same theater doing skill to the faculty conversation. Understanding that each of my colleagues also have different lens and try to learn that. And then on that, I guess the only thing I can say to answer, I guess is just to say that I'm just trying to see how can I find myself strategically intersect in a way, and how to be able to shape that conversation. So I think that's how, and given that I also have not enough time, so then I just have to strategically kind of say that, okay, can we talk about this in the next faculty meeting, for example? I think that's one way to do it. I'm just trying to practice the same thing that I'm asking my students to do, to kind of intersect it and ask the question when I can.
Yes. So just to finish the story, I did go up to the professor and I did address the situation, and we went through why and what and all of that. And it was interesting because he was like, oh, but other costume designers told me that that's how you should teach it. And I was like, send them to me. I will have a conversation.
I also have to also say that I don't know, I want to also give the benefit of the doubt to all the time.
Absolutely.
Because I do think that, particularly in education, I say this often to my students. I said that you have to understand that everyone in that institution are aiming for your best interest. We do. Because you don't commit to work in an educational situation to just, I don't know, it's not there for just the money, and maybe for some, I don't know, maybe for the dean, I have no idea, maybe some profile somewhere it is a career jumping move. But by and large, I think that educational institution, we're there to really care about your field, the students' growth and the student future. So I also think that when I interact with those situations, I want to give everybody that benefit of the doubt and understanding that that is just where people are coming in from, to try to see how to how to have this conversation. And also sometimes people are also doing things that is like, unbeknownst to me, is also actually making a progress on their own journey. You know, like I do think the institutions are trying. They may not just pick the right tools or the right timing or the right words or the right vocabulary. So then how can I be part of the to make it happen?
Mm-hmm. And I will also say that I know that I feel myself talking inherently kind of to my white colleagues at this moment. So taking myself back a minute just to say that obviously the dynamic of the classroom changes dramatically. The language that I'm using, how I'm addressing, what the specifics of the syllabi become, and that how to protect ourselves, like my students of color, myself as a person of color, that I'm not just the receiver of all that is like racism or the conversation of difficult blah blah blah. That actually that I want to empower that no, y'all can do this work too.
Yes, I think that is actually really, really also part of that thing with institution, is to empowering everyone to do this. Because I don't think this is exclusive, and this is like, there has been like tons of study that talks about academic burnout, particularly by BIPOC faculty member, because there is a tendency to sometimes to like turn to me and Sarita and go like, how would you deal with this situation? And then you go like, well, that's such a human situation. How would you deal with this situation, right? You know, like the subject matter and the context, the conflict may have that, you know, may need like thinking about from an anti-racist lens, right? But the feelings is real. It's just human. And so, how would you interact with another human? You know.
So, it's been so wonderful to hear all of this. And before I switch this over to the Q&A, and so this really is to the audience, me cueing you to sort of gather your thoughts, to ask some questions, to enter into this conversation. I'm going to ask my last question of the two of you, which is, given that we've gotten kind of a peek in their classrooms, yes, I'd love to hear about your favorite project or play or something that you assign, something that actually, and favorite, we could say something that is incredibly fulfilling or generative that you do.
I think that one of my favorite projects is actually with our first year student in a class called Fundamental of Stagecraft, where because it is actually incredibly, I know there are some students here and they're about to get me in the spring, so I'm going to give you this warning. It is incredibly impossible to actually teach lighting design as a standalone unit for 8 hours a week. Okay? So I'm constantly trying to come up with what does that mean? Because as a lighting designer, I say to people all the time that 90% of the time I do nothing, because everybody's like making models, drawing things. I'm just sitting around, going to meetings. And then there's like 10% of the time that I do everything, because that's the time I have, right? So to try to have those 8 hours a week to do that 10% of the time is just not possible. But then if I have them do the 90% of the time, then that's just boring, because we just sit around in meetings. So one of my favorite projects is actually the synthesizing it. And for a long time, I tried to do a piece that is based on this story about a story called Wind Phone, which is during the tsunami in Japan. People would just get washed away, and so in order to sort of mourn, they created this thing called a wind phone, so that people can go in and make phone calls and talk to their loved ones that they have like gone lost. And seeing how the student using all of their tools that they have learned to make that story come to life is one of the things that has been one of my favorite projects.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the project that I found so far, until I find a new one, that really engages them with themselves, that they like uncover more about who they are, whom they are, is this project called Seize the King by Will Powers. And it's sort of an adaptation of King Richard III. And there's so many facets of that project that I love that it's sort of like leading the witness almost, which is, and I do tell them this too. I'm like, I'm leading the witness. But if you don't know it, it doesn't specify race, but in the language of the play, there are tells there. And there are tells as to how the structure of the play wants to be, but it also engages with some real problems with clothing and presentation and how we put ourselves forward in the world. There's like a sort of an anti-hero-ness to it, which is really exciting. So it sort of hits a lot of like check boxes for me, but that's just like a very like, it's sort of like slot play into facet B, you know what I mean? And I think, so to really answer your question, what I'm looking for is how do we uncover ourselves and our own, like how do we ask questions of ourselves and put ourselves forward into the world with the proper language and tools, knowing that we're going to make mistakes and it's okay.
That was so great. All right, now, all of you who I cannot see very, very well because of this light, it's basically pretty much those two.
Yeah, there's only two, really.
Yes, yeah. So really, I'm opening up the space for Q&A. Our incredible stage manager, Shayna, has a microphone, and so really, it's okay if you have a question. We'd love to hear a comment, even if you think it's supposed to be a question. Please join in this conversation. I know that there are other artists, educators, students maybe who are here. So one and then two.
Hello. My name is Amara. I am a senior at Fordham University. And I guess the question I have it goes into the question of like the tools that you're given and how to work within a specific institution, even though that institution itself may not be like working towards anti-racism or social justice. And I guess my question is, do you think that there needs to be more of a foundation of anti-racism in order to teach students? Like, do you think it's enough to simply look at anti-racism through a play or design choices? Like, for instance, I know at Fordham something we've implemented only very recently was having anti-racist and anti-bias training for all freshmen during our collaboration class, because I think it's also something that's helpful in that collaboration conversation, like Jeanette, you were talking about, of how do you be a good collaborator? How do you be a good collaborator with people who look differently or are coming from a different perspective that you are? And so I just want to know, like, do you find that there are limitations to how much of that you can actually touch on in a classroom? And like, what are some other ways in which students could be learning those fundamental anti-racist skills within their institution, maybe not through like an actual class project though, if that makes sense?
So I'm going to jump in here because structurally, I'm an English professor, though I am trained in theater and performance studies and as a dramaturg. This is where I would encourage you to take classes if you can, but I also know that oftentimes departments, partly in order to sort of hold resources, make their major very heavy to fulfill, to keep students in the class, right? But if you have any other, open classes, space for this within your syllabus to go and do that. I also think that this is a way for you to find the people that you want, like find the mentors. They exist in other departments. There are faculty who are out there, even though we are living in a moment in which critical race theory is becoming a kind of bad word. The faculty are there, and they are pushing for different kinds of initiatives, teaching these kinds of courses. So I teach courses on race and performance in the English department. I'm at University of Rhode Island now, but when I was at the University of Cincinnati, we taught a required freshman course, 160 students, called Making Sense of Race and Racism. It was co-taught by a humanities professor and a social sciences professor. There were like a roster of us, and we would do this. And the moment that Trump was elected, the university made the decision to no longer make this class a requirement. So this part of why I like, and it was incredibly heartbreaking, but it was also something that was very much like student and faculty. It was because of the student and faculty demand in order to create these kinds of works, because I do think that some of this is about how do you get the kind of knowledge, training, perspective in as many places as possible, because that, I think, the sort of vastness and richness of this will only ever make you an even better theater collaborator. But I also totally know that many theater majors, and this is really a question of budgets, if their budgets are based upon butts and seats, what they decide to do is to make their major as heavy as possible to keep the students in the department. But if you have some space, go find, take a sociology class, being an English professor, one of the things that a lot of English departments are doing is, of course, rethinking the curriculum, but one of the ones that, like, within my own department, we were like, oh, no, what is it that you need a student to move through? And one of the first things we decided was we were like, oh, actually, we teach all of these courses in African American literature, but if you look at our major, it doesn't actually, you don't see those classes because they don't seem, it doesn't look like they're the required courses. You could actually move through without them. And so what happens if we refigure an entire department, an entire curriculum, where we make that a requirement? And then that also then that signals to the dean and the university when it comes time for reprocurement, that's what we call hiring, right? That this is something that the department is invested in because the students are demanding it, and therefore we need to do the hiring, right? Because a lot of the things in terms of like what we're also coming up against are the kinds of sort of institutional strictures that a student might feel moving through it, but even faculty and departments. So my answer to you is find people. They are there. They are there at Fordham, and if you can find space in your education, do that. I know a lot of places like URI, we outsource advising. So these are consulting companies who come in and who do the student advising, and basically this means they create the students' schedules. This feels anathema to me as a kid because I thought going to college meant I could pick my own classes. But there are now like consultants who do this and create schedules for students in order to get you through, in order for universities to have really good graduation rates, retention rates, doo-pa-doo-doo. But what that also means is you don't necessarily feel agency in the kinds of courses that you are taking. And I'm just, imploring you to know that even though there are these structures in place with these kinds of consequences that make it feel like you don't have agency, you do. And sometimes it's just as simple as finding someone's office hours or someone's class. All of us, when a student comes to us, and particularly a student of color, I love it when they find me. I love it when they show up in my class, but I'm also really happy that they found me because I know all the things that are in place that make it really hard for you to find me.
Hi, Amora. Nice to see you. The thing is, I think that we have to keep in mind that this entire conversation is like driving the Titanic, right? And I would encourage us to think about what's the one thing you can do in the next week, and then what's the one thing you can do in the next month, and what the one thing you can do the next year. And even within your organization, there is like, and I think that will give give yourself some satisfaction that something have happened, because I think that sometimes when we think about the entire Titanic, you go like, oh my God, I don't know how to steer you against an iceberg, you know. But if we think about it just one thing at a time, okay, maybe I should just let somebody know that we're heading towards an iceberg. And so at least we can be aware, and maybe then someone will ring the alarm, maybe like, you know. So I think that I would say, can you think about this and break it down into the smallest step that you can start out with, and then enact that. Find the person, in some case, to help you enact that, or you yourself enact that. It's like, is it about one email? Is it about something that I voiced this to get to help getting something happening? I think that the thing is that eventually we have to get it keep happening, because we are driving the Titanic. And we just have to keep it happening.
They said it so beautifully.
I think.
Hi, here's another Titanic. So with regard to what you were saying about integrity, authenticity, and representation, how do you as an institution approach intercultural performance and specific performance practices when perhaps the instructors aren't qualified in those performance practices and you can't just fire them or re-procure them because they're on tenure? And acknowledging the sort of colonial history of white male academics going to countries and pulling specific bits of culturally specific performance and then coding them to some sort of Western format. How do you be authentic and broaden students' horizons of what theater can be while still retaining that authenticity?
I can say that I love outsourcing, and even if that means I just love collaborators, and if I can't do it, I'll find somebody who can. I think Edissa Weeks, who is an amazing choreographer, she's really good at asking difficult questions, and she leads by example in so that she saw that her students needed access to something that she was not, I guess, like it was not her forte to teach. And she docked her pay. She took herself out to then make room for someone else to come in and do the work that needed to be done. I know that in our institutions there are different rules and things to navigate in terms of letting other people come in to help us with the work, but there are ways to do that. Nicole Lee knows that I'm very good at finding and finagling people into the room with me, because I think that's sort of what this is all about. I can't teach everything. I'm not the expert on everything. I think that engaging in research, and research not just in history, but research just even in the now is so vitally important, because I can't do it all. It's just not possible. So these events are really exciting because I get to re-engage with other people in the industry, re-engage with other people doing things that I have no idea existed. And I can put that in my back pocket so that when I'm in the classroom and a student says something that I'm like, oh, what is that? And then I can bring that human, that person, lead them, make that connection. I think that that's part of my job, is to make those connections.
Any hands? I see over here.
Hi. So I guess I'm wondering, how do you approach, I was thinking specifically, I guess, more about costume history, but sort of teaching, someone brought it up in the first panel of the day, the benefits but also the problems with knowing and teaching the canon. When you're approaching period pieces or even, a contemporary piece that is, I mean, what isn't influenced by the past, that deals with like historical themes or complicated historical work like Madame Butterfly. How do you, and I guess this is also sort of a dramaturgical question as well, how do you sort of bring an anti-racist lens to teaching the history that can inform the design process?
I think that this goes back to, like, I guess, why are you picking that material to start out with? And are we being clear in that material that we are picking? Like I realized when I was in Madrid looking at all this Renaissance painting, that I realized that those painting is teaching certain things about lighting design that have to do with a certain kind of scale and examination of how the sunlight reacts in a world being represented. I will bring it into the classroom because I want to talk about in that scale conversation. That's why I bring that work in, not because it is a canon. Right? I think that if we can do that with the material we bring into the classroom, like clearly if you're talking about Western dress silhouette, you can't skip 1900 England and like as if it didn't happen, right? And we're also acknowledging that, yes, because things are being documented, are obviously documented by people who have resources at the time and the power that is to be. We have to acknowledge that. And I think that that's the thing, is like, to deal with some of these questions, I think we have to acknowledge that there are problems and there are inherently something we have to acknowledge. And can we be, I think that what have been happening before, I guess, is like we assume the students just know and it's not a big deal and we never have to talk about it. But I think that it's actually us need to start to examine, like, why am I bringing this material in the classroom? What am I trying to teach it? And acknowledging that this material is also flawed. And it's okay that they are flawed, because otherwise we can't learn anything. And we have to.
Yes, absolutely, I agree with that. And on top of that, all people existed all of the time. And I think part of our job is to find that. So it goes back to seeing the non-seeing. Like, why do these people not have skin tones? You have to engage with all of the people all of the time, and understand, like, really truly engage in the history of whatever time period you're talking about, the conversation, what is happening in the world, and how those things are actually moving, and who is telling you how they're moving, and how the engagement of that conversation is. And it goes all the way down to, like, why the sleeve is inset in this way, why the pattern is cut in this way. It all ties together. Yeah, I hope that answers some of it.
I think for me, it's recognizing that history is not neutral, and the ways in which we have received history, the narratives around history, recognizing the uses and abuses of that history, right? And so if I want to sort of piggyback on Sarita's, there were people always at all times, right? One particular, one very surface critique of costume history is the way in which costume history is allied to Western dress histories, and that anyone who is not part of that has traditional garb, and then colonization and empire happens, right? And so part of what is being tasked in us is, I think, not to skip 19th century English dress, right? But perhaps also talk about, I don't know, the Meiji reforms, why it is that Western dress gets adopted in different places, to recognize that even the stories that we tell around clothes and costume history, those are constructions. They aren't naturalized, and how many of these constructions that we still have, I think it is extraordinary. You all laughed at this, but we could probably very easily find a costume history textbook that is really only a Western dress textbook, right? And so it becomes almost the perfect object lesson in a kind of myopic, like colonial pervasiveness, that part of the work I think that we all do already is to unpack that. So I think we have time for one more question. There was a hand, right? Yes.
Thank you. I have a question. What tools do you use to promote trust between the students themselves privately and then the students with you as a professor that allow it to speak from the I and try to eliminate or alleviate fear?
So I do quite a bit of work in terms of creating kind of social covenant for the classroom in which we come together with agreements that we have about how it is that we will speak to each other, how we will civilly disagree with each other. I think it's really quite important, especially given the kinds of works that I teach in class. And then something that I've recently added is, and part of it is because it came up in class and students asked for it, is I also have included quite a bit of bystander training. So it's like both for them to think about how it is that they will interact with each other in a classroom, and then how they might also interact out in the world, right? Because I think some of the things, and this is sort of speaking to your question, which is like, a student may find your classroom, they might find your anti-racist class, they might find you because you are a faculty of color, right? Teaching works that speaks to them, speaks to their histories, right? But they are also still, and at least for me, at a predominantly white institution, right? Within a campus, right? And so part of what I was interested in doing, or what students kept coming to me, was that they were like, oh, there are these things that I'm learning in the classroom. How do I bring them outside? How do I bring them outside in a way that is not harmful to me? What kinds of tools could I get? And so honestly, the way that I've done this is actually to go to incorporate bystander training. And that was the way I sort of dealt with it, but I'm sure others have others. But yeah, so it's a combination of creating a social covenant in class, how we speak to each other, how we civilly disagree with each other, how we name each other. Oftentimes, I also, when students are giving a comment, I have them, because you might have noticed I even did this where I was like 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, I usually end up having to do that. And I do ask the students that when they are in a row, that they affirm something their peer has just said before they launch into something they are about to say. So that part of what I want to build is kind of a chain conversation, but also an ensemble. So those are my methods.
I think it depends on the kind of classes that you're teaching also. I think that in design classes, because we rely a lot on critique, so we do have like framework on like how to critique work, like what is the helpful critique. In fact, I think that for NYU, I know that they learn it in the basic fundamental classes, so that vocabulary get built on. Again, I think that is about building vocabulary, hopefully, throughout all the different classes, so that the critique, because that's just kind of how design you can grow, is like to listen to critique and to give critique, and those things have to be done respectfully. So I think that there are some of those things that you can lay down. Personally, in my classroom, I try to get to know the student from day one, just who they are as human beings, so that I can then help navigate when things are happening, that I can help do that. So it's a combination of having some the structure, and we do have, like I do have a community agreement. We do have those things, but it's also, and in terms of fear, I think that's hopefully, I'm hoping that if we build in from day one that is okay to fail, hopefully they will eventually be able to get to that point. It's step by step, I would have to say, class by class.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure there's like the things that we've been taught to do, like community agreements, that we speak in draft. I also try to hold my class as if I am also in collaboration on like a project out in the world. So what I mean by that too is that if you say something to me today and I have a reaction, it takes me a minute to process. Next week, I can still bring it up. I still have the grace to revisit things that have happened in the past. That it's not that it happened, I let it go, I'm going to be quiet and just leave it alone. And by that, I'm also trying to, and I'm the one doing that work so that I can hopefully allow the space for them to feel safe to go back in time and revisit difficult conversations that they may have missed or not recognized. In addition to then also, the parameters of like, see me after class, here's my, here's where I'm accessed, these are the other tools that you have. But realistically, when we're out doing our job, I don't have the social worker for death of a city. Well, actually, now we kind of do. But how do you find those people? Like, I'm trying to teach them or give them the habits of how to have those conversations out in the real world and not just in the classroom setting.
I also have to say there's one solid tool that I have used is actually the amazing thing about Google Forms, which you can create a participation form for your students to fill out every class, so that you can actually get some feedback also. I think the feedback is also an important tool for at least for me to know if something is happening. That I will immediately know that time-wise I aren't always like the best in attending it immediately. I will be like I'm a failure on that end. I will admit to my own failure. However, I do believe in that tool, and I think feedback is really important.
So we are at time, and there is a reception, but there's also a kind of cushion of time. So, I mean, we could, I don't know if we're going to bolt. I think we're not, because there are these stairs we have to navigate, and then we have to walk through you. So thank you all so much. This is to say, thank you all for coming. And I'm going to go ahead and speak for the three of us that, given that there were other hands, if you have questions, please come up, talk to us. We're here today, we're here tomorrow, and thank you so much.